Hello, and welcome to the Game Audio Hour, episode 204. This is a fortnightly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences, to audio secrets. Here is where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. I'm hanging out over here on the bottom left, if you're looking at this screen on either Twitch or YouTube, Vince Diamante. Right above me is this very cool dude who is just above me, but is actually on the other side of the world. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm doing okay. Wonderful to be with you, fine gentlemen, this Friday evening or Friday afternoon in your case.
Yes, always glad to see you. And over to that side, it's Mike. How are you doing?
Doing just great this fine afternoon, and I feel like the way the world is progressing, we're going to have to start keeping track of time again, so I'm getting back in the habit.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. You have any estimates on how often you've made reference to time either squeezing, squishing, dilating, how many times you've actually done that over the last year?
7.
7? Oh, that's impressive. That is an order of magnitude better than me. I'm pretty sure I'm somewhere in the realm of 70. Oh, wait, 71. There we go.
Right. Actually, I'm 8 now. Hang on, let me update the little post-it I keep by my computer. Okay, great. 8.
8. Okay. There we go. Do we have 9? Do we have... Oh, okay. Anyways.
Yeah, anything could happen.
All right. Well, let's see. We have an interesting show because we're going to do something that we don't always do. We're going to really lean into some of the problems that we sometimes have, some of the less than ideal or less than optimal things that we do when we come across certain things in the world of game audio. Certainly, there are times when I have taken shortcuts or have taken the path that I know is unoptimal, or where I just simply struggle with a particular issue because it's just a thing that I've struggled with for years, starting with my very first forays into game audio. And honestly, that can be kind of tough, especially when you've been in the gig for as long as you have. For me, I've been in this gig for more than a decade, and sometimes I feel a little weird when someone is coming up to me and asking a question, and they're hoping that you could speak authoritatively on this particular subject. Sure, there are places where I feel very confident about that, but then there are other places where I think, oh, darn, I know basically how that goes. I know theoretically what I should be doing. But if I were to be honest, I would say, oh, I'm actually not really doing things necessarily the proper way in this space. So, game audio confessional for this Friday, this end of the week. What say you guys?
I'm feeling
Let's
confronted.
get into it.
Let's do it.
You go first.
Oh, okay, all right. I was actually hoping, sort of intimating that with that longer intro, I can get you guys to go first. But I'll go ahead and say it. I'll start off with one really hard thing, mixing and mastering. When I have a piece of music that is ready and I'm trying to deal with stuff, all right, I'm listening carefully, listening to my stems, listening to the larger mix. I'm soloing different tracks. I'm soloing bands. Okay, it's pretty tedious. It takes time. My ears get tired. Very often, I'm going to rely early on the visual representations. I have a tool called Izotope Tonal Balance, which I think is actually a really nice tool. And quite often, I use it as a crutch. Okay, tell me where things are going right now. Even before I really truly engage my ears, I will start with the visual and be like, okay, you think my bass is like that? Sure. And I'll actually be relying on that visual to dictate how I should go about with the actual mixing process moving forward.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that that's so bad. I mean, I think that we always get there is always that adage that everybody knows about, don't mix with your eyes, mix with your ears. Yeah, of course, that's very true. And at the end of the day, comes down to what you think it sounds like, basically, not what the spectrum analyzer is showing you. But if that's what you mean by relying on visual aids, the other thing that often bothers me is that, like, as I get older, I know that my listening ability in the treble range is going to be tailing off. Like, as you get older, the higher frequencies just, you don't hear them so much anymore. And the way to get around that is to constantly be referencing other mixes. The way to get around that with your ears is to be always referencing other mixes as you're mixing, so that you know that, okay, if it sounds like my reference to me, then that means I'm doing the right thing. But when it comes to sort of mixing high end and listening for shrill frequencies, or listening for uncomfortable tones and things like that, I don't know that it's so bad to really be using a spectrum analyzer, like a visual aid like that. And I don't feel that it's sort of cheating, or, I mean, that's what a spectrum analyzer is for. So I don't think you need to feel so bad there, Vince.
Okay. I mean, I guess really the thing is, I mean, I recognize that it's a great tool, and I'm glad that I have it in my toolkit, but I think it's more the fact that I engage it so early on. It's like, okay, and it's not just a spectrum analyzer. It really does make some strong recommendations on whether, this is outside of the range that you're looking for in this particular frequency band. Pull it down, basically. Not exactly in those words, but certainly the visuals tell you should do this specific move. And I do feel a little bit weird about engaging a visual tool like this really early on in my process. Actually, Mike, do you actually have this tool or others in the Izotope range?
I do have that tool, and I also find it useful as a general guide to seeing, is my EQ crazily off balance. And I think you're right, there's a subtle danger because what you're looking at seems like a mathematical representation of your audio, but it's actually a series of value judgments. It is telling you your bass or mid range or whatever should be between here and here. It's represented visually, so it has the patina of being like a spectrograph, something objective, but it's actually a set of value judgments as are represented by the particular preset you're using. The tool has a number of settings, and they're very broad strokes. They're like electronica, orchestra. Like they have one setting called orchestra, and that's supposed to show you the acceptable frequency range for an orchestral piece. But of course, different orchestral pieces and different genres can differ from one another wildly. So if you're doing something, soft with strings, and you've got this mathematical average of what the EQ curves of an orchestra piece should sound like, you're not necessarily doing an apples to oranges comparison. So I think it's a very handy rough guide, but you have to be a little wary about treating its advice too definitively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes I do that, though. There are definitely times where I'm relying on that. Like you said, it has that value judgment that is baked in there, by virtue of what you put in there, those presets that they have there. And you are able to tweak those presets, too. But they are, in fact, presets, and it does result in this judgment that tells you, hey, maybe you should do this move. Hey, don't you want to do this move right now? Go for it. It's a great tool. It really is. Izotope does make stuff that really... It's really amazing, some of the stuff that they do with all of their tools. And this episode is not sponsored by Izotope, but a whole lot of us use their products because they're great products. But it is possible to perhaps lean on it too much in different phases when we could be engaging our ears and exercising our own judgment rather than relying on the judgment defined by these presets.
Agreed.
Let's keep going around the circle.
Yeah, Alex. Let's go clockwise. Alex.
Okay, so I've written down. I've been taking notes, and I've written down 5 things, but we'll go one by one, shall we? And we'll keep going around the circle. We should be like drinking whiskey or something as we go around. This should be a drinking game. Anyway, okay, so this is a very very a big confession. Something that I often find myself feeling quite terrible about, and that is using plain old regular stereo sound in a VR game. Not stereos in headlocked, but just like not 3D sound, like no fancy binaural stuff like that going on, just plain old regular, like the same you would have in a regular flat screen game in a VR game. So I usually justify it by saying there's no point in having fancy binaural audio if the gameplay doesn't have anything that really needs the sound to sound like it's coming from, behind you or above you or below you or things like that. Like if the game doesn't need that, then why bother? That's the way I like to make myself feel better about taking the easy road. I'm just mixing a VR game as if it was a regular flat screen game, even though there is this whole sort of world of binaural and 3D audio possibility that really, as somebody who makes audio for VR games, I really should be kind of ripping into at every opportunity. So that's my first confession.
Well, let's go with that, because I think there is something to that. Like you say, sometimes you don't necessarily need to have everything in the world be binaural. It is really tough, especially since it is VR, it is immersive. There is that intimation that stuff has to be like that. But even in the world of, we've been in stereo and surround world for a while. There are plenty of good reasons not to have something be stereo, and a lot of codified things for that. Okay, there is a speaker who is the active speaker on screen on the right side of the screen. No, well, I mean, they're the active speaker. They're going to be front and center. That is the code. That is what is necessary to help with our understanding their intelligibility. That's meaningful there. And I think we're probably going to find more things that are like that in the VR space. And maybe this is you thinking a little bit more ahead of the curve, actually, rather than, being lazy.
This is great. I see the pattern for tonight. We'll go around the circle and announce our confession, and then the others have to kind of console and say, no, actually, it's not so bad. So, Mike, it's your turn. Take a drink first.
Right. Drink some Waterloo Black Cherry Sparkling Water to steel my system for this moral indulgence. Okay, I've drummed up some liquid courage. I'll start with one that's a really bad habit and a perennial one of mine. Orchestral ensemble patches, meaning a magical instrument that doesn't exist in the world called strings, where you put your hands on the keyboard and suddenly the entire string section is mapped out to what you're playing with some arbitrary decisions made as to whether your thumb is the highest cello note or the lowest viola note, and some kind of weird crossfading, so your thumb on middle C is actually half violas and half cello. It's quick, it's easy, it sometimes sounds temptingly good. I think these patches, be they strings or brass or whatever, are actually very valid at the sketching phase. If you need something quick and dirty, if you're fleshing out ideas, of course, they're great. It gives you a sense of an orchestration with very little effort. But I do feel that somewhere along the line, you should do a detail pass on if you're doing an orchestral mock-up, or if the digital orchestration is your final product. You should do a detail pass and really say, is that a trumpet? Is that really a trumpet? Do I have 6 trumpets in this imaginary orchestra? How about we make some of those horns? Or how about we take this thing that I played and thin it out so that there's voice leading and those inner voices? all these things that make the choral writing or polyphonic writing just sound subtly more realistic and better. And sometimes I don't do that. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, that Symphonia brass actually kind of sounds nice, and it's drowning in drums and percussion and winds and strings. And who's going to know if I sit there and hand reorchestrate it? I'll just keep it. It's just this one phrase, right? So therein is the golden paved path to sin. I'd like to say that when I have a lot of time, I do make that orchestration pass. I'll even go to paper and write out the voices for this thing that's ultimately not even going to be a live orchestra. I do care sometimes when time permits, but not always, and often I take the lazy route. So that is my first confession of today's Symposium of Sin.
That is fantastic. I'm so happy to hear that. Do you know why? Because I don't do orchestral music, as you know, and when I do, or when I want to toy with it, of course, being somebody that like have a very strong quite a strong knowledge of classical music, but I would never ever attempt to try and orchestrate something, because that's like rocket science. Like, it's neurosurgery. Who can do that? I mean, pros like you guys can do that, but I can't. So naturally, of course, I'm going to go and pick up, Symphonic Essentials or Symphobia or like Albion or like that kind of instant orchestra kind of thing. And when I'm doing that, I think, oh yeah, cool, this sounds like an orchestra. But man, Mike would probably be like sneezing and like cursing for no apparent reason if he could see me right now using this orchestra patch, because this is not the way, like this is it. It's good for kind of making the orchestral sound more, let's say, democratic, I guess, because you don't need to have advanced knowledge in orchestration in order to get that texture. But then it really, really feels like cheating, because there's like this whole world of orchestration and instrumentation that I don't need to understand in order to use that. So to hear that somebody of your caliber sometimes uses those as well makes me feel much better.
Well, I'm very glad that you in particular feel forgiving of this practice, and I'll say no more other than to mention that I have, in fact, worked for you. So practically.
Oh, man. Yeah, we are not sharing MIDI files anytime soon.
Yeah, gonna have to go back and have a bit of a re-listen to some of the stuff we've done together there, Mike.
Oh,
with your
Vince, do you ever use those kind of instant orchestra patches?
You know what? Yep.
No.
Oh no, I mean, I certainly have. But if anything, I actually lean the other direction, where I will just work with my full, proper orchestra templates, rather than a sketching tool. And if anything, I'll be a little too slow while I'm dealing with the minutia of writing at the beginning. Sometimes it works out that way. Yeah, maybe I should actually go further in that direction. Break out, like Spitfire. They have the Mass, which is their which is another one of their sketching orchestra tools that comes along with Spitfire Symphonic. But it's more likely for me to treat I'm writing strings, I'm going to go right to it. Violins 1, violins 2, viola. Let me think about how I'm distributing across this. And actually that gets in the way sometimes of me writing. So yeah, it's a thing. But it actually did make me think of something that is kind of related to that. And it is connected to the orchestral work that I do. Almost every big orchestra piece that I do has these certain pads that I have in order to just make everything feel a little bit bigger and fuller, just expand the chord a little bit more without having to explicitly write that stuff in any particular place. I'll go ahead and say it in Contact. In the good old Contact Factory library, there's a pad called Damascus. And I'll just have a slow attack on that, a slow release on that. And I'll be like, okay, what am I doing here with my strings? And what am I doing with my horns? It needs to sound bigger. Okay, I'll follow the chords, play that in, and then there I go. It sounds bigger. Great. And, so that's a place where I'm like not explicitly doing proper orchestration, but All right, it just makes the orchestra sound bigger in that place. So that is
Mike?
something I do.
Mike, do you know this patch?
Oh, Damascus and I have a long history together. Of all the synth patches, quasi-synth patches in Contact, Damascus has like this little, it has like kind of a moving filter quality, so it's not quite as static as a lot of sampled synth sounds. And because of that, it blends really interestingly. So I share your confession, Vince. I've done the same.
Oh man,
I'm gonna have to go and check that one out now.
it's really good. Sometimes I'll write something that feels, oh, it's a little sparse here in these strings, or this brass. I mean, I'm writing it full. Maybe this is something that needs to be bigger in mixing. Maybe it's something that needs to be bigger in terms of how I'm arranging. Okay, I probably should do some better distribution. Okay, work my trombones more or something like that. Oh, okay, no, I could just fix it by just layering on some Damascus, and there it is. It works.
That's
It
great.
ships. Totally ships.
I'd like to offer a
That's
quick piggyback sin because I don't think this warrants its own confession, but I'll add it to your sin. Is that if you're doing multi-voice chordal writing, it's very easy to stick with the ensemble patches as opposed to then going and not only deciding what lines are what instrument, but switching to legato patches so that the intervals are smoother and more realistic. So you don't have like this smear of instruments that have very slow attacks that have this weird, overlap period that you're okay with. Instead, you have legato to have those kind of clean changes from one pitch to another. And it's another kind of laziness where, in order to you enjoy that sort of fuzzy quasi synth-ish sound of strings kind of oozing into each other rather than the sound of multiple individual voices blending together. So it's a similar philosophy than the slather on Damascus approach because you're going for a similar
Yeah.
kind of cheap, quick richening of your textures.
Ooh, over in the
Okay, so
chat.
I guess-
Sorry, I just wanted to mention over in the chat, Michael Hoffman says, I'm the same way with orchestra patches. Sometimes I leave them in or layer them with individual instrument sections. So I think this was a little earlier. So I think he's referring to you, Mike, and relying on those ensemble sketching patches. Yeah, I mean, it's great. They're great.
Suddenly, all of Michael's clients are rushing to their email client right now to
This is a really good opportunity for the two of you because you could look to the screen and say, if you would like music written with proper inner voicing, please contact.
That's right. So actually, Damascus, that kind of is a nice segue into my next confession, which is possibly a little bit unusual, but I always feel that I'm cheating when I'm using synth presets. Because you know me, I really, really prefer and pride myself on the fact that most of the time when you hear synthesizers in my music, which is all the time because my music always has synthesizers in it because that's what I do, it's all entirely stuff that I've rolled myself. And I like to do that way because you have 100% control on the sound. It makes mixing much faster because you just address it in the sound as you're creating the sound. You just address those mix issues in the source sound, so you don't have to do that much after the fact. Sounds great. Sounds like me. Nobody's going to listen to it and say, "Oh, that's Damascus," right? So those are all the sort of the ways that, like the principles, the axioms that I like to kind of hold myself to. So whenever I'm in a hurry and I just whip up a preset and say, "Yep, that'll do. That's it. Great. Next." I always feel like I'm doing my own principles a disservice. So yeah, synth presets.
Presets are useful. I mean, presets are great for. Presets are great. Presets are also really fantastic learning resources with certain types of synths. I got to admit, I use presets all the time. I don't think I dive really deeply into some of these synths the way that you do, but it also does depend on the synth instrument itself. There's this one instrument that I got recently, a couple months ago actually, called Lion. It's one of these really nice modular synth sort of deals, and it is a very scary interface when you first open that thing up. There's a lot of things going on. I feel like the presets are actually fantastic because of the way that, yes, it shows everything to you and it's scary, but whenever you load a preset, it also shows everything to you and what's going on as you switch between these presets. So it's actually a really nice learning space for just jumping between these presets and seeing how it actually treats different sections of this interface and gives you some ideas on what to do with it. I mean, that's very different from, say, presets in a contact synth, for example, where a lot of things will be hiding under the surface. And
right.
Yeah.
That's a good point, actually. If you're familiar with the open source DX7 synth called Dexed, D-E-X-E-D, if you've not seen or you don't have Dexed, you should definitely get it, because it's an extremely accurate sounding DX7 emulation, but it reads original DX7 sysx. So that means if you know where to look on the internet, you can find literally thousands of DX7 presets for Dexed. I have thousands of presets for my Dexed, which is great because the DX7 for certain styles, it's like the Fender Telecaster. It's just fits in so perfectly. But the DX7 is a very, very complicated instrument to program, and Dexed, the software emulation, whilst it makes it more approachable in that you can see everything on the one screen, it's still a very, very complicated, FM synthesis interface. So yeah, like you said, Vince, there's probably like a correlation between how easy a synth is to use and how often you're likely to go to the presets because you just can't be bothered, or don't have time or patience, or just not interested in trying to learn how to use it.
Yeah. I feel like between Mike and me, it's just, hey, I mean, presets. We've had presets for a long time, for centuries. They're called violins 1 and violins 2 and violas. It's like, hey.
Yeah. Okay, so next will be Mike, I think.
Right. Here are two drum-related bad habits. One is using a drum loop rather than programming a beat pattern. And the sin kind of follows the path of the last one I mentioned, because I think drum loops are perfectly good for your initial sketch. But in a case where you don't need extremely specific sound represented by that loop, it's better to try to program something on your own, both to inspire creativity and perhaps add more variations. You're not literally always listening to the same loop, particularly when it's an acoustic drum or percussion loop, right? Because then you've got the strange phenomenon of something that sounds photorealistic, but is literally echoing itself over and over again. And the related sin number 2, and this may be a little more severe, is applying EQ, compression, or reverb to a drum kit instead of individual drums. So in other words, you've got your loop, or perhaps you've got your painstakingly sampled Superior Drummer 3 drum kit where you've got all these mix options on every single kit piece, and you can decide how much the bass, the kick drum is going to bleed into the hi-hat mic. Like, you have all this control. And then sometimes they'd be like, drum reverb number 3, that'll be fine. I'll just roll off the low end so that the kick drum doesn't get the reverb, and that'll do just fine. So I've engaged in both of these bad habits, and again, there's kind of a speed quality trade-off, because you really should give each kit piece its own special treatment, at least in terms of reverb and EQ. And sometimes I think like first order is good enough.
I kind of want to echo that, but Alex.
I strongly disagree. I hard disagree, as they say. I think I like mixing drums very, very much. Very, very, very much. As both of you know, it's It's a personal fetish, I guess. But the way that I approach mixing drums is actually always to do that first, Mike. So the first thing I'll do is split it out into channels, right? So you've got kick, snare, hi-hats, overheads, toms, whatever, right? Next thing I'll do is sum that. And then on the sum, the first thing I'll do is EQ the entire sum, just as you said. The reason that I do it that way is so you EQ the entire sum, get the basic sound that you want, and then if you can't get it by EQing the entire sum, then I take entirely not a one-by-one approach, but okay, like for example, this kick, I can't get it to sound right by EQing the sum. That's when I'll go and do something to the kick. But I personally don't feel you get the best results from mixing drums by individually ensuring that every channel is individually mixed before it gets summed. And the reason for that is just because I always find that I get a much more coherent, sort of glued together drum kit sound if I'm EQing the entire thing rather than just the individual parts first. So I don't think that's a sin. I think that's good practice, actually. But that's only the way that I like to do it. It also could be time saving, because try first to get the sound right from the sum saves you time rather than sort of going through, listen to the kick. What do I want to do to this kick? Okay, I think I'll do that. Okay, next. Listen to the snare. What do I want to do? What's wrong with the snare? Okay, fix that. If we're talking shaping for a sound, then I absolutely think that that's the right way to do things, at least from the way that I like to work, is start with a sum. If we're talking fixing problems, like if it's actually a recorded drum kit, then there's a lot of problems that you're going to get with the individual mics on individual drums that you can't really fix in the sum. But I really feel personally that's the way that I like to work. I start with the sum and then work backwards rather than start with the channels and then work forwards.
Well, I think the key difference is the eventually work backwards provision of your methodology. For what I'm describing is you start with the sum and you end with the sum. And if there's a problem, you just switch drum kits. That's kind of what I do when I'm in a rush. So I think even though you are pretending to descend to my level and telling me it's okay, I don't think you've fully made that plunge. I think what you're doing is still more refined and more appropriate than what I've described.
Vince, you're going to have to arbitrate here.
No, actually, the way I see it is I thought, Alex, you were trying to do something very clever in telling that his sin is not a sin at all, and therefore, Mike, you need to go again. But no, that's not what's happening there. I actually think it does make sense. I really do. I was going to say yes. I echo what Mike said because I often do that approach where, just dealing with that single master drum bus. And yes, ostensibly there's all the other component parts, but doing some work there, calling it a day. Yeah, I've definitely done that. And more often than not, I would say, for that type of, for certain types of music.
All right, Vince, you're up next.
Oh, I'm up next. Oh, am I going to say it? Sure. So here's something that I think is actually this is a pretty sad sin for me. I have a decent collection of microphones for various applications. I've got a couple of shotgun mics. I've got a couple of ribbon mics. I have the facility to do some interesting sound effects recording here, especially since I just built this space and this floor is floated. So I can have some stuff here. I can do proper Foley work. And I'll go ahead and say it. In the last year, I've probably spent maybe 2 hours total doing that type of stuff. I know that I can put more time into it and get proper recordings for some of the sound effects that I'm trying to do. But so often I'll just rely on my libraries. I'm just going to go to libraries for a lot of things, even stuff that I know I have a lot of. I've got plenty of metal pieces. I know that I have the ability to do stuff for knives and swords, for example. I've been doing a little bit of that type of work last year. And I could do that with recordings. I've done all of that work just with library stuff. And granted, I do put work into it. You know, it's not like I'm just copying waves over or splitting up some of these larger library files. I'm doing work. I'm doing stuff with EQ and compression and time stretching and getting it to properly mix with stuff and all the things that are needed with FMOD integration. But that doesn't change the fact that I really am not effectively using my recording facilities right now. And I got to admit, it does make me a little bit sad. I think I'm not sure if I have a really good excuse for that, honestly, other than at this time, it feels like kind of a time sink, where it would just take me a certain amount of time to get to a particular point that I'm happy with the asset compared to my very smooth workflow of dealing with library sounds or dealing with synth and editing and mixing and working with it from that standpoint. So yeah, I kind of feel bad. I've got a very decent mic collection. I've got very decent mic preamps here, and they are unfortunately underutilized.
That's a very nice segue into the next one that I was going to say, actually, because it's interesting that you consider that a sin. I guess if you are sitting next to a cabinet of some very nice microphones and a bank of wonderful preamps in a room which is built, at least initially, with the objective of being able to do that kind of stuff, but you're not, I suppose, yeah, I can see where the guilt would come into that. In my situation, I cannot do that kind of work. Like, I cannot record. I don't have a nice microphone collection. I don't have a mic preamp. I only got the one in my interface. So I cannot really record my own sounds. And so I'm always using libraries to do sound effects. So the same as you, though. Of course, I don't just take the sound effect and say, there we go, door sound, done. You know, I'll always put my own touch on it and make sure that it's entirely fitting for the objective, but still sounding like something that I've done and that I can feel proud of. But my confession that relates to yours, Vince, is freesound.org.
Oh man. Hold on. Okay, really?
So despite owning a very comprehensive library of sound effects that I've amassed over the many years that I've been doing game audio, and I really like my collection and I know it quite well, and it basically covers a lot of territory. There are just those times when you just don't have that particular sound and it needs to be specifically that, and I don't have the means to record it, so I don't have it in my library. I could spend 2 hours trying to make it, out of constructing it out of other library pieces or trying to synthesize parts to it, which I've done before as well. Or I could just go to freesound.org and download an excellent recording that somebody else has done and use that instead. So that's my confession.
Oh, that hurts. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things there that actually are very worrisome. I mean, Freesound is a great resource, but it's also filled with landmines. Because even though it is free sound, there are some pretty significant issues that exist there with things that are not properly attributed or actually have outright false information when it comes to what the item that is there. They might say, "Oh, I recorded this crowd noise from Dodger Stadium when I was there 10 years ago," when no, it's not that at all. It's actually from, I don't know, it's from Series 6000 or it's from Pro Sound Effects or something like that. And this guy got it from a BitTorrent somewhere, and that's actually not cool. So I'm kind of wondering about this, though. Like, is it because Freesound is just that easy to deal with? It's okay, we got this easy interface, plug in something, it will give you just a crap ton of results from your search query? Is it just a matter of that, or is it just,
To be fair, the main times that I've done this is when the sound is something that is really, really, really unusual or really, really unique, like something incredibly distinctive. I can give you an example. A really good example is this, like the classic cartoon, vintage car horn, that kind of thing, right?
right?
So that kind of thing is a really good example of you want specifically that sound for some kind of dramatic purpose, and I don't have it in my library. So go to Free Sound and you'll find lots of people who have recorded that sound, or they say they've recorded. As you said, Vince, you can never really be sure. And I'm always careful to check the license of what it is that I'm using to make sure that if it does require me to mention somewhere that I used that person's sound, then I'll make sure that I do. Or if I'm not able to do that in a convenient way in the credits of the game or whatever, I'll make sure that I don't use that sound. But Freesound has quite a lot of that kind of thing, just like that specific sound that we all know, and it has to be exactly like that. Another really good example is the Wilhelm scream, because that is iconic. And as game audio professionals, and I know that everybody who is watching this would agree with me right now, it is utterly essential that the Wilhelm scream is in all of our work in some form or other. This we know. So that's another example of, I don't have the Wilhelm scream in my library. So, how am I going to get it? So that's another example of where freesound.org often comes to save the day.
Alex, if you were writing music for a meditation album of soothing ambiences, would you somehow find a way to work the Wilhelm scream into that?
Mike, do you need to ask? I mean, the answer is evident. just like pitch it down, put some granular effects on it, make a really, really heavy sort of like low pass over it, and then like layer it in 100% wet reverb, and there's your drone.
Right. So you're not thinking of like just at the tail end of a fade out. You just hearing the fully intact Wilhelm scream. You're being a little more subtle about it.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, let's face it. Come on. That is really the end of this whole confessional discussion, is the Wilhelm scream. We've all done it. We've all put it in our project somewhere. That is the apex of this discussion, I think.
Oh man, well, we've been at this for a while, about 40 plus minutes, and we could probably keep on going further. I don't know. Actually, I don't know, Mike. Is there something that's really on your mind that you really want to put out there to the world?
Well, Alex did mention that we were done, so
okay.
If you guys want on, I don't want to slow you down.
Okay, let's move on, because there are a couple of interesting things that have happened in the game audio world just recently. Some interesting news items. Let's briefly mention some of them. We've mentioned both Izotope and Native Instruments in this particular episode. And actually, just a week or so ago, Izotope and Native Instruments, they put out a press release saying that they've joined forces under a new music and audio creator group, an unprecedented alliance of top brands opening up new creative possibilities for musicians, producers, and audio engineers. No one really knows what exactly will manifest out of that, but it's kind of interesting. These are two very big players in the industry. Native Instruments, obviously, for music and music production. Izotope for lots of tools that are related to music, lots of tools that are related to sound effects. RX is kind of a de facto standard when it comes to very low-level sound editing in not just games, but the film world, radio, forensics. I mean, it's kind of everywhere. So this is a really big partnership, but the press release is very light on details, and so there's been a lot of conjecture out there on the internet what this will result in. These are two companies that are very big, and people have a lot of very strong opinions on how these companies have operated over the last few years. I'm kind of excited. I'm kind of excited because I like Izotope a lot. I also am a little bit worried because Native Instruments hasn't necessarily been the best with some of their upgrades. Here's a concrete example. Contact 5 to Contact 6. Contact 5 is obviously a proprietary format, but it was also sort of understood that you could just take Contact 5 instruments and move them around into your sampler of choice, move things back and forth. Oh, you have a Contact 5 library. Let's load it into Motu or Halion or something like that. And you could. Contact 6 is very encrypted, and no one has figured out how to actually work with that. With Contact 6 being this new sampler format, it's not really a good working intermediate format for people now. And I've been using Contact 6 for various internal projects when it comes to prototyping things, like working on a music rhythm game and creating instruments inside of Contact in order to prototype how this rhythm game works out in the game. And using Contact 5 as in this intermediate format, we can move back and forth. It's great, me and other developers. Contact 6, that door is totally locked shut now. So there's some interesting things going on, and I'm really a little bit anxious and also a little bit excited for what will come out of this partnership. You guys have any thoughts on this?
One interesting question about both Native Instruments and Izotope is, what have they done for us lately? And I feel like both companies have in the past developed groundbreaking products that have become essentially standards in their respective categories, and all of which have tremendous innovations in the past and subsequently refined. But if you look at the tendency, the kind of recent history of both companies, I see a lot of repackaging of the existing technology, a lot of cosmetic changes, and few new innovations that are being introduced. You just pointed out a great example of Contact 5 to 6. If you look at the last couple of versions of Ozone, there's not a lot differentiating them other than some interface tweaking and some moving features from Neutron over to Ozone. And I feel like both companies are slowing down significantly and are increasingly interested in monetizing existing technologies and less interested in doing new stuff that's great. So the merger of companies that have that in common make me a little nervous.
Yep. I think I share some of that nervousness, some of that anxiety. We'll see. We will certainly see. Alex, did you have any thoughts?
No. Actually, I don't use Native Instruments or Izotope products.
I see.
But I did actually have another piece of a news item which you might not actually be aware of, because I know that you're not a Cubase user, but we do have quite a few Cubase users in our audience, I know. And of course, our beloved co-host Chase is also a fairly die-hard evangelist for Cubase. Anyway, Steinberg announced last week that they are currently now rethinking the dongle. And anybody who uses Cubase will, or like any of the Steinberg products, will know what a controversial statement that is, because the dongle, for those who don't know, Steinberg products like Cubase, they need to have a hardware dongle, which is a USB drive that you plug into your computer in order to actually open the software. And it has to be always connected. The big news, of course, is that users don't like that because it takes up a USB port, and for what? Their security? Well, I paid money for Cubase, like Why do I need to prove to them that I'm legit when I forked out that much money for this? From Steinberg's point of view, it's for Steinberg's point of view, it is very like the dongle itself has saved them a lot, because it's very hard to pirate Steinberg software when you need a piece of hardware. But they're finally also admitting that it's a little bit archaic, that system, and also it is holding them back, because with any of the other DAWs, you can purchase online, you can download it, and get started within minutes. Whereas in the case of Cubase, if you want to use Cubase, you need to first order it, and then you got to wait for the dongle to arrive. Then you got to download it. Then you got to go through all of the funny licensing stuff and the Steinberg download assistant and all that, which is all really sort of, I don't know, if you compare it to other DAWs, it just feels really clunky and very 1990s somehow. So they're aware that people have been upset and that people are kind of a little tired of the dongle. So they announced last week anyway that they are now considering a new alternative, but they haven't said anything about what that's going to be. And I think quite a lot of people are worried that it's going to require an always-on internet connection, which for a lot of us doesn't mean anything, because we, have always connected computers. But for a large group of people as well, it does mean a lot, because they specifically use machines that are not connected to the internet for various reasons. So if they're going to have an always-on connection in order to prove that they've purchased a license, that could be problematic for a lot of people too. So it will be interesting to see what direction Steinberg takes over the next, I don't know how long it's going to take them to do it, next few months as they transition away from the dongle.
I think as well, the dilemma of people who have a always-on internet connection, but for whom that connection is not 100% reliable. What happens if you're rendering a massive queue that might be as slow as real time because you've got so many plugins and virtual instruments instantiated, and your internet connection flickers? It goes out for a second and comes back. Is that going to cause part of your licensed plugin collection to stop working in mid-render? Or will it be more of an enlightened approach where maybe each plugin wants to validate once a week or even once a day? I think something like that might represent a reasonable compromise, and hopefully that will be the route they go.
In the chat, Michael is on the YouTube chat. Michael has mentioned Steinberg has been using e-licensing for Dorico, but the dongle isn't necessary. So I don't know if they've just extended that to their other software. You use Dorico, don't you, Mike?
I do, and sometime in my ancient past, I opted, for whatever reason, I had that choice, license it to your computer, your specific computer, or a specific computer, or put it on the dongle, which theoretically gives you the freedom to run Dorico on your laptop if you have two machines. And I said, of course I want that ability, but I really regret it, because I think it slows down the startup process, and it has all the encumbrances of any kind of hardware. So, ideally, it would be nice if there was an e-license that was agnostic to, like if it had a concept of you as a licensee rather than a particular computer. So that way, wherever you go, the license could follow, and it would just make sure you're not using it twice at the same time.
Yeah, definitely for the, on the side of the dongle, iLock also has a dongle iLock, and it also has the e-licensing iLock. And I got really, really burnt by the e-licensing iLock system, because I thought, it's fine. A lot of the newer companies that have joined up with the iLock system, they use their e-licensing, so you don't need to have the USB dongle. So I thought, great, I'll just use that. And I had this old Mac, which is sitting right here, and the motherboard fried itself, so I had to get the whole thing replaced. And when you do that, it's a total disaster, because like all of your iLock software is tied to the old motherboard, and you have to deactivate it before you can activate it on the new motherboard. And you can't deactivate it because you don't have access to it anymore, because it fried itself. So that I contacted iLock, and they said, sorry, but you're going to have to contact every vendor for every plugin that you've got registered there. It's like, So when that happened, I wasn't in the middle of a project, so I could actually do that. But I was thinking to myself, wow, like if I had a deadline to meet and this happened, that'd be a total disaster. So yeah, well, it'd be interesting to see what direction they take, because if it is a sort of a, connected to somehow, some key that's buried deep into your system that's connected to your hardware signature in some way, that potentially, it could result in the same kind of problems that the iLock e-licenser has.
Oof. I feel you on all this. I had an iLock, a first-gen iLock die on me. Ugh. But let's go to some lighter news, because there's been also some cool stuff that has happened in the last few days. Yesterday was the Baftas, and there have been some celebrations there. Celebrations in place for lots of games, and especially for game audio. So the winner for the BAFTA and audio achievement for games was won by Ghost of Tsushima. And the winner in the music category was Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales. So really cool there. I actually have not played Spider-Man Miles Morales yet. I've been waiting on that PS5 for a while, like many people. But I have played Ghost of Tsushima a bit. That's there's definitely a lot of audio achievement in there. Really great. And moving on, over at Gang, they revealed their nominations in all of their audio categories. We're not going to go through all of them right now, but Audio of the Year, the nominees there were Cyberpunk 2077, Copper, this dog, Cyberpunk. We got Hades from Supergiant, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and The Last of Us Part 2. Sound Design of the Year for Ghost of Tsushima, Half-Life Alyx, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Paper Mario, The Origami King, which is actually interesting to see because for Gang, it's actually pretty rare that you see the big Japanese publishers and developers really get representation. But for Sound Design of the Year, Paper Mario is actually nominated there, and also Last of Us Part 2. And then the other big category, Music of the Year, Animal Crossing, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Hades, wait a minute, is that right? Metamorphosis, and Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and Star Wars Squadrons. So those were the big categories there for the Gang nominees. And of course, there's a lot of other categories there that you should really peruse once you get a chance. Best Audio and Indie, Best Dialogue, Creative and Technical Achievements. Lots of categories there, and I'm looking forward to when the show happens later on. That's going to be on April 28th when the winners are announced there. We're coming up to the end of this hour, so why don't we just go right to Conspicuous Consumption.
No,
yes.
Not that name.
Yes.
Right. I'd forgotten about
No,
that.
you cannot forget about this. Alex, has there been anything that you have been consuming conspicuously?
Yes, very conspicuously, actually. I've been trying Valorant from Riot. It's been very, very interesting. From a game audio, just very briefly, from a game audio point of view, it's quite a lot of excellent sort of creative decisions in the sound in Valorant that's quite interesting, especially how they've decided to balance the music and the sound effects, and the mixing is quite interesting and very much prioritizing gameplay in a very interesting, unique way. So yeah, I recommend, if you are good at shooters, which I am not, then I would recommend checking out Valorant and having a good listen, because it is quite an interesting case. So that's me.
Cool.
Mike?
After playing Civ 5 for almost continually since it was originally released in like 2011 or whatever it was, I've finally taken the jump and moved on to Civ 6. So I'm now only like 3 years past the state of the art of the franchise, as opposed to 12 years or whatever it was. But just kind of dipping my toes into it so far, getting used to all the changes and the new to me graphic envision for the series. And so far, I like it a lot. It's going to take some getting used to, but I feel like my core instincts will translate without too much uprooting of my long thinking strategic tradition. So good experience so far.
Cool.
Nice. Vince, how about you?
Well, let's see. I'm messing around with some hardware rather than any particular game. I decided to pop the Stadia on my living room TV, and it's actually been kind of cool going through the rounds with that new piece of hardware. Stadia is, of course, the cloud gaming service that Google has. And being cloud gaming, everyone talks about latency. How good is the overall game experience when it comes to that sort of timing requirement? It's pretty good. I played some old school games, some new games. So Destiny 2 is there, and it looks good. It feels good to play, actually. It feels pretty quick. I didn't really notice any significant difference between that and the PlayStation 4 version of Destiny. There's Panzer Dragoon, which is a remake of the old Sega Saturn game. Again, another sort of 3D twitchy type of shooter. And it actually felt good to play. It also sounded pretty good too. You know, it's nice to play on the big living room TV with the surround sound system. So that was actually really fun, just trying out a couple of different games with that hardware. And we'll see how Stadia does in the future. Obviously, they've been in the news in a not great light as of recent months with them changing how their development structure is and a lot of developers getting laid off, but it still seems like they're pushing ahead with new releases too. So we'll see how it goes this year for them. Yeah. Cool. And I guess that's it. That was episode 204 of the Game Audio Hour. Thank you very much to all the people that joined us here on Twitch, on YouTube. You guys are really cool, and we're really happy to be with you on these Fridays, just being able to share some of our thoughts and feelings on game audio whenever we have a chance like this. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll come back to you guys maybe later next month. Could find us on Twitter, Game Audio Hour, and there is where we will post our updates on when episode 205 will be broadcasting live to you guys. So until that point, later. Bye.